You'll write this as a speculative fiction, the framing of real ancient warnings predicting modern collapse isn't supported by the actual cuneiform record. Atrahasis, Eridugenesis, Enuma Elish contain no astronomical or geological predictions, so I'm treating it as a narrative, not history. Here's Chapter 1. Chapter 1. The Tablet That Shouldn't Exist. Imagine a clay tablet no larger than the palm of your hand, baked hard 4,000 years ago in the heat of a Mesopotamian kiln. The wedge-shaped marks pressed into its surface are cuneiform, humanity's oldest writing system. Most tablets like it record grain shipments, debts, the names of kings, mundane bookkeeping from the dawn of civilization. But the story we're about to follow imagines something different. A tablet attributed not to a scribe or a merchant, but to a name that echoes through the oldest myths ever recorded, Enki. In Sumerian tradition, Enki was the god of water, of wisdom, of crafts and creation. He was the one who, in the flood myths, broke ranks with the other gods. When the divine council resolved to wipe humanity from the earth, the stories say it was Enki who whispered a warning through a reed wall, telling a man to build a boat to save the seed of life from the rising waters. He was, in the mythology, the god who refused to let us drown in silence. And that is where our story begins. Because what if, and I want to be clear, this is a thought experiment, a piece of speculative storytelling. What if Enki's most famous act of warning was not his last? What if before the figure described in these myths departed the world of men, he left one final message, not carved in praise of a king, not a hymn or a prayer, but a warning, addressed, the story imagines, to us? Not to the people of Sumer, to the people who would come thousands of years later. To you. Here's the unsettling premise we're going to explore. The warning, as this narrative frames it, was never about sin. It said nothing about morality, nothing about pleasing the gods or obeying commandments. Instead, it described triggers, specific, physical, measurable triggers, patterns in the sky and in the deep earth that would, the tablets supposedly claimed, appear again before the next great collapse. A magnetic shift in the planet's invisible shield, a change in the rhythm of the sun, a stirring in the floor of the deep ocean, far below where any ancient eye could ever have seen. Now stop and ask yourself the obvious question. How could a Bronze Age civilization, people who believed the sky was a solid dome, who had no telescopes, no seismographs, no concept of a magnetic field, possibly describe phenomena that modern science only confirmed in the last 100 years? The honest answer is, they couldn't. And that tension, that impossible gap, is exactly what this story asks us to sit inside. Not to believe it blindly, to examine it. Because here's what's strange. When you take the imagery of the oldest flood myths, the trembling earth, the darkened sun, the waters rising not from rain but from below, and lay it beside what geologists and solar physicists now study, the resemblance can feel uncomfortably close. Not because an ancient god predicted the future, but because human beings have always been watching the same planet, recording the same catastrophes, encoding their terror in the only language they had, myth. That's the real mystery we're chasing. Not whether Enki was real, but whether the ancient stories preserved a memory, a genuine record of something that actually happened to our ancestors, a real cataclysm, witnessed, survived, and passed down for so many generations that it hardened into the shape of a god leaving a warning. Consider what we know for certain. Around the end of the last ice age, the world did change violently. Sea levels rose by more than 100 meters. Coastlines that humans had lived on for millennia vanished beneath the waves. Whole landscapes drowned. The people who survived that did not have writing yet, but they had stories. And stories, told around fires for 10,000 years, have a way of surviving longer than any city. So when the Sumerians finally invented writing and set down their flood myth, were they inventing a fantasy? Or were they finally recording, in clay, the oldest true thing their culture knew, that once the world ended, and only a warning saved them? That is the question this video is built around. Over the next chapters, we're going to take the supposed warnings of this tablet, the shifting poles, the changing sun, the restless deep ocean, and hold them against the hard data of modern science. We'll separate what's genuinely known from what's been imagined. We'll find where the ancient fear and the modern measurement overlap and where they part ways completely, because whether Enki ever held a stylus or not, one thing is undeniably real. Our ancestors lived through the end of a world, and they left us instructions. The only question left is whether we're still capable of reading them. Want me to continue with Chapter 2, the scientific decoding beat? Chapter 2, Decoding the Three Warnings. Let's take the story's three warnings one at a time, and hold each one against what science actually knows. Remember the frame we set. This is speculative storytelling. There is no real tablet where Enki describes pole shifts. But the value of the exercise is in the contrast, where ancient fear and modern data brush against each other, and where they don't. The first warning, as our narrative imagines it, speaks of an invisible shield around the world growing weak. The shield, in the story's language, is what keeps the fire of the heavens from reaching the soil. To us, that's an unmistakable description of something the Sumerians could not possibly have known existed: Earth's magnetic field. Here is the genuinely strange part. Our planet really does have a magnetic field, generated by molten iron churning in its outer core. It really does protect us, deflecting the constant stream of charged particles the sun throws our way. And it really is weakening. Over the last 2 centuries, the field's strength has dropped measurably. There's a vast region over the South Atlantic where the field is so thin that satellites passing through it routinely suffer glitches and have to power down sensitive instruments. Scientists call it the South Atlantic anomaly, and it is growing. More than that, the magnetic poles do move. The North Magnetic Pole has been racing across the Arctic towards Siberia at a pace that startled the researchers tracking it, fast enough that global navigation models had to be updated ahead of schedule, and the geological record shows the poles have, many times in Earth's history, done something far more dramatic. They've flipped entirely, north becoming south. The last full reversal was around 780,000 years ago. So does this confirm an ancient prophecy? No. And this is where honesty matters. A weakening field is real. A pole flip in the deep past is real. But there is no evidence that a reversal is imminent, no evidence it would arrive as a sudden catastrophe, and crucially, no evidence that past reversals caused mass extinctions or civilizational collapse. The field weakens and strengthens over thousands of years. The story compresses geological time into the span of a human warning. That compression is the fiction, The underlying phenomena are real, and that's exactly what makes the story feel so persuasive. The second warning concerns the sun. In our narrative, the tablet describes the great light changing its breath, sometimes calm, sometimes raging, in a rhythm that humans would forget to fear. And again, the real science is uncannily suggestive. The sun does breathe, in a sense. It moves through cycles, roughly 11 years long, of rising and falling activity. At the peak, its surface erupts in solar flares and coronal mass ejections, enormous blasts of charged plasma hurled across space. We have lived through one historical reminder of what that means. In 1859, a solar storm now called the Carrington event struck Earth. Telegraph wires sparked, operators received shocks, auroras lit up skies as far south as the Caribbean. At the time, the damage was limited because humanity had barely begun to electrify. Today, a storm of that scale could cripple power grids, fry satellites, and knock out the communication networks that modern life depends on entirely. That is not myth. That is a documented risk that space weather agencies actively monitor. But here, too, the story overreaches where the data restrains. The sun's cycles are not building toward some final, world-ending crescendo foretold in clay. They are ordinary, repeating, and, to a large degree, predictable. A severe solar storm is a genuine hazard. A scripted apocalypse on an ancient timetable is not. The fiction borrows the real danger and dresses it in prophecy. The third warning is the strangest of all because it points where no Bronze Age person could ever have looked, into the floor of the deep ocean. The story imagines the tablet describing a stirring in the abyss, the earth's hidden seams growing restless, the waters rising not from the sky, but from below. And the deep ocean floor is, in fact, geologically alive. It's laced with fault lines and volcanic ridges. Undersea earthquakes happen constantly, and the largest of them generate tsunamis, walls of water, that can cross entire oceans and erase coastlines in minutes. We saw it in 2004 in the Indian Ocean, and again in 2011 off the coast of Japan. The deep earth truly does move, and when it does, the consequences arrive from below, exactly as the oldest flood imagery describes. Notice the pattern across all three. In each case, the ancient image points to something genuinely real, a magnetic shield, a restless sun, a moving seafloor. And in each case, the story exaggerates the timing, the certainty, and the doom. The phenomena are facts. The prophecy is invention. In the next chapter, we'll ask the harder question. Why does that combination feel so true? Chapter 3. Why the warning feels true. So we arrive at the hardest question of all. If there is no real tablet, if Enki never warned us about magnetic fields or solar storms, then why does this story land the way it does? Why does the combination of ancient myth and modern data feel so unsettlingly true, even when we know the prophecy is invented? The answer isn't in the clay. It's in us. Human beings are pattern finders. It's the single most powerful thing our minds do, and it's the reason our species survived at all. The ancestor who saw a shape in the grass and assumed predator lived longer than the one who assumed wind. We are descended from 100,000 generations of nervous pattern detectors, and that machinery never switches off. So when we lay a 4,000-year-old flood myth beside a satellite map of a weakening magnetic field, our minds do what they were built to do. They connect. They find the resemblance. They whisper, This means something, and there's a name for the specific trick at work here. It's called confirmation bias, dressed up in cosmic robes. When a prediction is vague enough, the shield will weaken, the sun will rage, the deep will stir. Almost any real-world event can be slotted in as proof. The magnetic field is weakening? Confirmed. A solar storm in the news? Confirmed. An earthquake under the sea? Confirmed. We notice every hit and quietly forget every miss. The prophecy never had to be accurate. It only had to be flexible, and we did the rest of the work ourselves. But I don't want to leave it there, because that would miss something genuinely profound about why these stories survive. The myths feel true, because, in one crucial sense, they are carrying something true, not a prediction, a memory. Think back to what we established in the first chapter. Our ancestors really did live through the end of a world. As the last ice age released its grip, seas rose by more than 100 meters. Land bridges that people had walked across for generations sank beneath the waves. Coastal villages, hunting grounds, entire territories, gone, swallowed within the span of living memory. The people who survived, that didn't have writing. What they had was story, and they told it, and their children told it, and the telling carried that ancient terror forward across 10,000 years until a Sumerian scribe finally pressed it into clay. So when the flood myth describes waters rising and the world ending and a warning that saved the few, that isn't fantasy. That's data. It's the oldest eyewitness account we possess, compressed and mythologized, but rooted in something that actually happened. The story feels true because it is an echo of a real catastrophe, encoded in the only language our ancestors had. And here is where the speculative becomes genuinely useful. Because if you strip away the false prophecy, the idea that a God wrote our future in advance, what's left is a real and sobering message, not from Enki, from the planet itself, and from the long record of our own species. The message is this: the Earth is not the stable, predictable backdrop we like to imagine. Its magnetic field genuinely does weaken and shift. The sun genuinely does hurl storms capable of crippling the systems our entire civilization now depends on. The deep ocean floor genuinely does move, and when it does, the consequences arrive without warning. None of these things are scheduled. None of them are prophesied, but all of them are real, and all of them are reasons to pay attention, not with fear, but with preparation. That's the difference between a prophecy and a warning. A prophecy tells you the future is fixed and you are helpless before it. A warning tells you the danger is real and you still have time to act. The ancient flood story, at its core, was never about doom. Remember how it ended. Not with humanity destroyed, but with a man who listened, who built, who survived. The whole point of the myth was that the warning worked. So maybe that's the real inheritance our ancestors left us. Not a tablet predicting magnetic pole shifts, not a coded calendar of catastrophe, but something more durable and more honest. The knowledge that the world has ended before, that people lived through it, and that the ones who survived were the ones who paid attention to the signs and prepared while there was still time. We don't need a Bronze Age god to tell us the field is weakening, or the sun can rage, or the seafloor can move. We have the satellites and the seismographs and the science. What we sometimes lack is the will to take it seriously before the warning becomes the disaster. That, in the end, is what ENKI'S imagined tablet really asks of us. not to believe in prophecy, but to remember that we are still the kind of creature that can be warned, and still, if we choose, the kind that listens.